Jeff, I am in such hurt and dismay right now over what happened this morning that I just don't think I'm going to be able to go about the rest of the day and do the work that I've got to do in front of my computer and so forth and so on. I'm just really, really, really deeply into dismay. This was a statement that my client made a little while ago as we were going through a counseling session together. He had just finished recounting. Actually, that was his first statement, but I said, well, what's happened? And then he began to recount for me what had happened recently. He, his wife, and kids had a family gathering to talk about certain matters, and it just went very, very badly sideways. It seemed to be going well, and then my client reports to having made just a very, very slight mistake, just inconsequential, actually, just a real tiny thing. But that provoked his wife and some kids to just melt down, yell, shout, scream, um, cry. There were many tears. There were many accusations. There was raising of voices. And it was coming in his direction from his wife and from his kids. And it was the family just had a huge meltdown that morning. It was very, very bad. It was could even be described as probably verbal assault. And in lieu of all that, he said to me, Jeff, I am so dismayed. I feel like I can't even put my thoughts together properly in such a way as to be able to go about work today and do what I've got to do. So we talked about that, my client and I told him of a somewhat similar situation, not the same, but similar, of a situation that had happened to me some time ago when my wife had said some things that just I became extremely dismayed. And all of that story is outlined for you if you're interested in seeing it in the YouTube video called Dismay #1. But I was recounting to him from my experience that maybe something that I discovered regarding this matter of dismay might be helpful to him. And I was confident that it would be because I know my client and he's eager to learn spiritual truth and eager to apply it to his own heart. And so we looked at Isaiah chapter 41. I'm not going to go into great detail here because I've described that, and again, dismay video #1. But I told him that in my dismay, I read chapter 41 of Isaiah, verse 10, which says this: Do not fear, and I wasn't fearful in that episode that I was going through, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. Well, I was dismayed. I was tremendously dismayed. But I was encouraged when I read on, which says, For I am your God, I will strengthen you and help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And righteous right hand. And I told my client that I was dismayed, and God's antidote was to remember something accurately, and that is, I am your God. I am going to strengthen you. I am going to help you. I am not going to leave you. And so I discovered my dismay, but then I realized the antidote to my dismay was to remember who God is, who is my Heavenly Father. And as I began to meditate and think and ponder about those things, as I began to think and believe what God was saying about how big and wonderful and great He is, I was beginning to think and believe accurately, and I was able to report to him through this first video. Within 2 hours of thinking, meditating, pondering, remembering those things about God and His love for me and these promises here, I got up 2 hours later and my dismay was gone. Just literally completely gone, and I thank God for that. And my wife and I went on to have a great day, but I was recounting for him and encouraged him to look back in video #1 of dismay to see that experience a little bit more in depth. Well, as he and I were talking, I did not talk to him about Psalm 143. But what we were doing, what I did in my experience, and what he and I were doing as we were unpacking for him, well, who is this God? What does it mean that I will be with you? What does it mean to strengthen you? What does it mean that he wants to help you in this? Who is he, by the way? Who is he? And as we began to think about how big and wide and broad and long his love is, um, we were connecting on that level for sure. And what we were actually doing is what Psalm 143 says. I didn't refer this to him, but we were doing this. Watch what's happening. David says in Psalm 143, verse 4, something that I had said and something that my client was saying. He said, so my spirit grows faint within me, and my heart within me is dismayed. Well, we could both remember that. I had gone through that. He was going through that currently as we were speaking. But then the next verse says this. It doesn't stop there. It says, I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all your works and consider what your hands have done. I spread out my hands to you, O Lord. My soul thirsts for you like a parched land. And so what we were doing, I was telling him my story of dismay, but as he was telling me his story of dismay, then what we began to do, what David said, I remember the days long ago. Meditate on you and all of your work. So as we began to think of what God had done for him in the past and how big and wonderful and great and glorious, how deep, how wide, how long, how high is God's love for him. We talked about that very briefly. The time didn't permit for us to spend hours on that, but we probably talked about these promises to my client probably for 10, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And we had to finish the session. But at the end of our session together, I asked my client a question that sometimes I ask, and it was this question here. I said, listen, what I want to ask you as we close here is, in any little, medium, or great way, has your dismay dismissed, and diminished to any degree in the course of our conversation together? Or in other words, we started our conversation talking about your dismay was this big. Has it gone down a little bit, or a little bit more, a little bit? Has it gone down at all? And he said two things. He thought about that. He's a serious, speaking the truth and be accurate. So he wanted to answer me. He wanted to think about it because he wanted to answer me honestly. And this is what he said. It has gone down. It has gone down. And I know the reason why it has gone down. It didn't surprise me about my client. He's that kind of a guy. He's smart. He's bright. He's taught by the Lord. What we had talked about was very helpful. And I said, well, tell me what's on your mind. He said, well, my dismay has gone down, yes, but I know why it's gone down. The reason why it's gone down is because you have helped me to think and believe about really what is the truth about who God is and how big he is and how glorious he is and how in control of all things he is. And in comparison, the events that I went through with my family recently has become much less powerful, less influential to me, and because of that, and less impactful upon me. That because I'm seeing God clearly, truthfully, and I'm believing in my heart what these passages say as they apply to me. That's why I know that my dismay is going down. So he and I agreed at the conclusion of that session that that's how God helped me. It appeared that God was beginning to help him that way as well. And so I encouraged him to look long and hard at Isaiah chapter 41, particularly Isaiah chapter 40, which is also talking about how big and wonderful and glorious God is and how small everything else is, including family meltdowns. They're not pleasant. They're very difficult. But we got to keep them in perspective, and these passages are helping us to keep it in perspective along with Psalm 143. So I encourage them to look at these verses. I encourage them to go back and look at Dismay number 1 video, Dismay number 2 video, Display number 3 video, and Dismayed #4 video. Why? Because those videos help him to remember, uh, in the context of Dismayed, the truth of the gospel and how big and glorious and wonderful it is, and how everything that we go through in life is significantly less powerful and meant to be less impactful in comparison to the gospel. So I encourage them to go back over quickly, perhaps one soon, and over maybe the course of the weekend to look at these other videos. I pass this along to you because it's not only it's a kind of an appendix to something that happened to my life when I was in a spot of very dark dismay, how God rescued me, and how God, I had a client recently who told me his story and how God was beginning to rescue him in the same way. And I hope that this is helpful to you as you wrestle with your own dismay, that you don't think that dismay is this caused by your circumstances. Dismay is caused by having a huge family meltdown and God being and having forgotten God, who He is, and the gospel and how big and powerful that is. And as that becomes bigger and more powerful and more truthful and accurate in your heart, well, you're going to find your dismay going down, as I did, and as my client did as well. And I'm confident that it'll help you in this way as well. Look forward to looking into dismay deeply, more deeply next time we get together.